As I walked into the room, Brandon's phone began ringing. I picked it up without much thought and called out for him to answer. A voice came from the bathroom, asking who it was. I glanced at the screen, which displayed the letter N, and hit the answer button, putting the call on speaker. A woman's voice, trembling with emotion, came through. "Brandon, I'm back." Almost immediately, Brandon opened the bathroom door, his lips pressed together as he shot a nervous glance at me, reaching for the phone. Without thinking, I raised it higher, stopping him with a look. "Brandon," I said, "I came back before your wedding. It's not too late, right?" Brandon swallowed, his throat bobbing as he nervously responded, his voice shaking. "You must have the wrong number. This is crazy." The woman interrupted him, saying, "I know you're still angry, but I regret everything. Can you give me another chance?" I watched Brandon, cold and silent, his panic evident. "Say something," I urged. When he remained quiet, she snapped sharply. "I'm at the church in my wedding dress. I'll wait for half an hour. If you don't come, I'll just marry someone else." Brandon couldn't hold it in anymore. He grabbed the phone and hung up, muttering under his breath. "Crazy woman. I'm getting married tomorrow, and she's pulling this stunt." He walked to the bedroom, tossing the phone onto the table. "She's just an old neighbour out of her mind," he explained casually as he lit a cigarette. His actions were smooth, but it took him a few tries to get the cigarette lit. Standing by the door, I held back my feelings and asked, "Then why are your hands shaking?" Brandon acted like he didn't hear me, lost in thought. Less than 3 minutes later, he stubbed out the cigarette and spoke anxiously. "I can't just leave it like this." Grabbing a random shirt, he continued dressing while explaining, "She's young and impulsive. She doesn't understand. I'm worried she might actually go through with it and marry out of spite. Wait for me. I'll be back soon." Brandon buttoned his shirt and rushed past me so quickly that I didn't have time to stop him. I followed him in my car, watching as he sped through traffic, running red lights. By the time we arrived at the church, a woman in a wedding dress was already in Brandon's arms, crying. I froze in the car, my scalp tingling when I recognized her. It was Naomi, the woman Brandon had once confessed to. At that time, Naomi had rejected him with disgust, saying, "I see you as a brother. You want to sleep with me? That's disgusting." Brandon had frozen in place. As I got closer, I could hear her sobbing. "You know I'm slow to realize my feelings. Why couldn't you wait a little longer? Only 5 years and now you're marrying someone else. Can you not?" Brandon stood motionless, repeating, "Stop crying," in a dry tone. He didn't push her away or reject her. Instead, he remained there stiffly, like someone I didn't recognize. Finally, he said, "I'm getting married tomorrow." But his tone sounded more like he was trying to convince himself than Naomi. Naomi shook her head and clung to him tighter. "I can't let go," she insisted. I wiped my eyes dry, trying to hold back tears, and stepped forward. "Brandon, do you want to come with me?" I asked. Brandon gently pushed Naomi away and looked at me, stammering an explanation. I didn't hug her. She wouldn't let go. Naomi stood defiantly, shouting, "Brandon, if you leave now, I'll marry someone else." Brandon glanced back at her, then I stepped into his line of sight, raising my voice. "Is the wedding still happening tomorrow? If not, I'm leaving now." Brandon pointed toward the registry office, which was closed. "You heard her. She won't leave," he said. "There's no but." A deep feeling of helplessness washed over me. The staff had already left, locking the doors behind them. "Do you two not realize how ridiculous this looks?" I asked. Brandon sighed with relief, though I couldn't tell if he was relieved that Naomi wouldn't marry someone else or that his situation was temporarily resolved. After a moment, he agreed to leave with me, but his eyes kept darting nervously to the window. As soon as we started driving, Naomi's number called again. I ignored it, blocking her number. Brandon drove silently, saying nothing. At dinner, he anxiously took care of the final wedding details. It wasn't until I excused myself to the restroom that he snuck onto the balcony to return Naomi's call. From the hallway, I clearly overheard his low, frustrated voice. "Naomi, you were the one who didn't want me. You think I'm so pathetic that I'll come running back just because you cry?" Not a chance. My wife will only ever be Sarah. His words were harsh, but he didn't end the call. I don't know what Naomi said next, but a few moments later there was a loud crash as Brandon's phone hit the ground. He picked it up and rushed toward the door. I stopped him calmly, saying, "If you walk out that door, we're done." Brandon brushed me off. "Sarah, I don't have a choice. She was taken to the hospital after trying to kill herself. If you don't believe me, come with me and see for yourself." It was the first time I had seen him so distressed. On the way, he nearly mistook the brake for the gas pedal. At the hospital, he couldn't wait for the elevator and pushed through the stairwell door instead. I didn't know which room Naomi was in, and Brandon wasn't answering his phone. It took me a while, but eventually I found her curled up in Brandon's arms. Brandon looked at Naomi with red eyes, scolding her for being foolish but apologizing over and over. Naomi didn't respond, just shedding tears silently. When she noticed me, she whispered, "Can we start over?" Brandon held her tighter. "I can't! You're too late!" I almost laughed at his words. His need to take responsibility reminded me of something from our university days. Back then, Brandon had used that same phrase to win me over. I remembered how in our junior year, he'd accidentally sprained my ankle with a basketball. He'd carried me to the campus clinic while I cried from the pain, pounding on his back in anger, yelling at him for ruining my ability to walk and attend classes. He had gritted his teeth and endured it, but when we arrived, he collapsed into a chair next to me, laughing. "I'll take responsibility for giving you a ride to class," he had said. His familiar voice brought back memories of that confession I had overheard 6 months earlier. "Keep complaining and I'll punch you." "What's your school and name?" he had asked. I rolled my eyes and refused to answer, unaware that he had shamelessly peeked at my name on a medical form and somehow gotten a hold of my class schedule. That day, just 3 minutes before class ended, he was already waiting at the door. When our eyes met, he leaned on the railing and made a silly face at me. As soon as the bell rang and the teacher left, he strolled in, squatted down in front of me, and motioned for me to get on his back. The moment the classmates erupted in applause, I blushed deeply with embarrassment. Furious, I grabbed my crutch to chase him off, but he reached out and snatched it from my hands, leaving me with no choice but to give in. As we walked down the stairs, I warned him not to show up next time. I didn't want my classmates thinking the wrong thing. He flashed a mischievous grin and replied, "No chance." Other girls began to approach him, but he rejected them with a scowl. If they didn't leave him alone, he'd announce loudly, "I'm waiting for my girlfriend to finish class." I sat in the classroom feeling restless and anxious while Brandon peeked in, his eyes filled with pride that he couldn't hide. Later, I scolded him for his shamelessness. He leaned over the desk, inching closer, his breath warm against my skin, sending a chill through me. "Sarah, you've left me no choice. You'll have to take responsibility for me now," he said slowly. 5 years later, Brandon was holding another woman, saying those same words. "She has no choice. I have to take responsibility for her." In that moment, I stopped myself from asking him anything further. There was no need to question him anymore. I realized that the woman was Naomi. I couldn't compete with her. Naomi looked at me with a faint smile before pretending to act nervous. She turned to Brandon and asked, "Can she give you back to me? I know you still love me. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come." Brandon's silence said everything. Naomi slipped out of his arms, her face flushed with happiness, and leaned up to kiss him. Their kiss was filled with passion, as if they were the only two people in the world. It was just like when Brandon and I had first started dating, intense, fervent, and all-consuming. It had made me believe, perhaps naively, that he had truly let Naomi go and fallen for me. That illusion almost trapped me with no way out. I couldn't watch anymore. I went downstairs, sat in the car, and cried for a long while. It wasn't until 2 a.m. that I finally calmed down. Choosing my words carefully, I sent messages to my family and friends in our group chat, informing them that the wedding was cancelled. Brandon left the hospital while Naomi was asleep. He felt he had no other option. Everyone knew he was supposed to be married today, and not showing up would bring him shame. He planned to make it up to Sarah later and end things with her. They hadn't even gotten their marriage license yet, but Sarah had agreed to come with him to see Naomi. However, she hadn't answered his calls. Sitting downstairs, Brandon smoked a cigarette, then hurried to shower and change. He was running late and his groomsmen were already arriving. When Brandon reached the hotel, he met up with his groomsmen. The elevator rang, signaling his arrival on the floor where Sarah should have been. But when he stepped into the hallway, no one was there to greet him. His heart sank. This must have been a really bad sign. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. His groomsmen exchanged worried glances, asking if perhaps he had the wrong room. Without responding, Brandon pulled out his cracked phone, preparing to call Sarah. He hadn't slept all night, and his mind felt foggy. Just as he was about to dial, one of his friends shouted from the elevator that someone had seen Sarah heading up. Brandon let out a breath of relief and turned to leave, thinking he was on the wrong floor. As he walked to the elevator, he called out, "Sarah, I'm sorry I'm late." But the doors opened to reveal Sophia, Sarah's best friend, standing alone. Brandon froze, his heart sinking further as an uneasy feeling spread through him. "Where's my wife?" he asked, his voice nervous. Sophia's expression was stormy, her glare sharp enough to cut through steel. She took a deep breath, pulled a box from her bag, and threw it at him. "Don't call her that. Sarah told me to return this to you." Brandon's eyes dropped to the box on the floor. The sight of it was painfully familiar, but he didn't dare pick it up. "Where is she?" he asked. Sophia sneered, her gaze full of contempt. "She said she can't accept a family heirloom like that. As for the wedding, she's not coming." "Do what you want." Brandon recalled that the bracelet had been passed down from his grandmother to his mother. His mother had been reluctant to give it to Sarah, but after Brandon begged for a long time, she finally agreed. And now, Sarah was refusing it and not showing up to the wedding. What did that mean? Cold sweat drenched Brandon's shirt. He tried to convince himself that this was just Sarah's way of punishing him. It was such an important day. This couldn't be real, right? "Tell Sarah if she wants to call it off, she should say it to my face," he muttered, determined not to let her act impulsively. But as soon as he finished speaking, the elevator doors opened again. "Brandon, go to hell!" A man stormed out, and before Brandon could react, a foot landed hard on his chest. "I got a call from the police station. I rushed over," the man said. Brandon was seated off to the side, his face swollen and bruised, while his friends loudly complained to the officers. "It's not my fault. Someone downstairs said they saw the bridesmaid in the elevator." How was I supposed to know the bride wasn't there? They were vicious, showing no sense of reason, completely barbaric. Brandon's brother, hearing this, couldn't hold back his anger. He started shouting at Brandon, "You want to talk about reason? My sister gets humiliated for no reason. How's she supposed to reason with Sophia?" Sophia sat next to Brandon's brother, showing no intention of stopping him. I quickly walked over to calm him down. It was then that Brandon noticed me. He jumped up abruptly, calling out, "Sarah, I ignored him and instead turned to the officers to ask for the case details. It took a lot of effort to get my brother and his friends released. Brandon trailed behind, calling out, "Can I have a moment? Just 5 minutes." My brother crossed his arms, blocking Brandon. "Lost. And I just want to understand what happened." Brandon looked at me desperately, pleading. I gestured for my brother to take the others to the car. The autumn wind blew, making my coat puff up, and I felt a heavy weight in my heart. Tying my coat's belt tightly, I spoke first. "Let's not meet again. This is the end for us." Brandon tugged at his hair in frustration. "I really don't understand what I did wrong. Weren't we fine yesterday?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Fine? Getting the marriage license, playing suicide games, even kissing. Does that still count as fine? Brandon, do you think I'm a fool?" Brandon froze, then quickly reacted. "You saw. It wasn't like that. She forced me. You know that. I know you're angry and resent me, but why didn't you tell me earlier? Why leave me to make a fool of myself in front of everyone?" He rambled on, but no matter what he said, the blame always fell on someone else. Enough, we're done! I couldn't listen anymore, cutting him off. Sarah, don't do this. Give me another chance. Breaking up like this isn't dignified. Dignity? Was I the one who didn't care about dignity? I had simply realized my place. I was giving in, accepting that I no longer wanted to waste my energy fighting for a love that was never mine. What if I never see Naomi again? Brandon suddenly asked, as if he had already made up his mind. I looked past him and noticed Naomi walking toward us. Raising my chin, I gestured toward her. You should ask her if she agrees first. Naomi would never agree. The moment she saw Brandon's bruised face, she lost her temper and slapped him hard. I quickly turned my head to avoid it, but her nails still scratched my skin. You humiliated Brandon, fine, but why did you have to hit him and let everyone mock him? I opened the front-facing camera on my phone to check my face. Seeing only slight redness, I raised my hand and slapped her back, even harder. You think I'm easy to push around just because I've stayed quiet? Let me make this clear. People are mocking him because of you. You ruined our marriage. Naomi grabbed her face, her tears flowing like a broken faucet. Her voice shook as she said, "That's not true. We grew up together. I've known him longer than you. What we had was mutual. You're the outsider who destroyed it. You're the one to blame." Naomi wore a white dress that day, and with her tear-streaked face she looked so fragile and pitiful that Brandon immediately forgot his earlier determination. "Stop it," he said, reaching up to wipe her tears, but no matter how much he tried, the tears wouldn't stop. "When I woke up and didn't see you, do you know how terrified I was? Please don't leave me again," Naomi sobbed. Brandon, filled with guilt, pulled her into a tight hug. Then, turning toward me, he scolded, "Can't you show some understanding for a patient? Did you have to provoke her?" I felt something lodge in my throat, rendering me speechless, but that was fine. I didn't need to say anything more. I turned to stop the approaching group of angry onlookers. Back in the car, my brother handed me tissues and spoke softly. "It's okay. I'll find someone 1,000 times better for you when we get home." Hearing that, my tears came pouring out. "Brother, it's not just him. Everyone else is bullying me too." The news of our fight on the wedding day somehow spread to the alumni group, and many classmates speculated it was my fault. After all, Brandon had dressed in a suit and held flowers, looking every bit the earnest and nervous groom. Meanwhile, I was the one left to deal with the aftermath. "Who is it?" "I'll grab a few guys and go beat him up again," my brother said, his usual impulsive self, unable to stand seeing me hurt. The moment he heard what I said, he slammed on the brakes, ready to turn around. I shook my head. "No, I don't want to clean up this mess anymore. Let me handle it myself." At that moment, I felt grateful for the clarity I had the night before. I had taken a photo of Brandon and Naomi kissing, complete with a timestamp and location. I opened every group chat related to Brandon and posted the photo. "Thank you all for your concern. Brandon and I are no longer involved, as shown in the image above." After sending it, I exited the groups and uploaded the same post to my social media. Within a minute, Brandon called, but I turned off my phone without hesitation. Returning to the hotel with my brother, we picked up our parents and left the city together, going back to where I truly belonged. Home. After that, no one dared to mention his name again, except for Sophia. One evening, unable to watch me wallowing at home any longer, Sophia dragged me out to a bar. After a single drink, she pulled me onto the stage and grabbed the microphone. "Tonight, I'm buying everyone a drink to celebrate my best friend Sarah discovering her fiancé's cheating before the wedding. Cheers to her newfound freedom." I held a bottle of beer in front of my face to hide my embarrassment, then dragged Sophia back to our seat. "This is so embarrassing," I muttered. Sophia gave me a disapproving glare. "It's been over 2 weeks and you're still not over it. Look at you, so pathetic. Am I wrong? Finding out your fiancé cheated before the wedding deserves a celebration." "You're right," I mumbled half-heartedly. Sophia wasn't satisfied. She narrowed her eyes at me and pulled out her vibrating phone. After a quick look, a sly smile spread across her face. "Your brother says he's on his way." I nodded indifferently. She added with a wicked grin, "He says he's bringing someone for you to spend the night with." What does that mean? I wondered. It turned out he was serious. Within 10 minutes, my brother arrived, accompanied by a tall, lean man. Sophia, ever perceptive, moved to sit across from me, ignoring my attempts to pull her back. Without wasting time, my brother shoved the man toward me, then took Sophia to sit elsewhere. Awkwardly, I sipped my drink, unsure how to handle this. Having only ever dated Brandon, I didn't know how to interact with a man, especially one my brother had brought over. Thankfully, the man seemed experienced. Smiling calmly, he raised his glass and clinked it against mine. "Nice to meet you, I'm Martin. My brother said I'm leaving my sister with you. We've got something to discuss with Sophia," he said. Before his chair had even warmed up, my brother was already trying to leave. As he passed me, he leaned down and whispered, "He's 1,000 times better than that scumbag. Appreciate him." In a panic, I reached out, but all I could do was watch helplessly as they walked toward the exit. Noticing my discomfort, Martin gave me a kind smile. "Want to take a walk outside?" Fearing that another drink might push me over the edge, I nodded quickly. Martin gently took my wrist through my sleeve and led me through the crowd, walking by the riverside. The breeze helped clear my mind. The breeze helped clear my thoughts slightly, and I found myself openly looking at Martin. He was certainly handsome, with a build that suggested an impressive physique, maybe even an 8-pack, and great stamina. But what about his medical reports? I shook my head hard, trying to stop myself from getting distracted. "I don't know how much my brother paid you, but I'm not interested. You can leave," I said, gathering the courage to speak. Martin paused as if realizing something and looked a bit troubled. "But if I take the money and don't do the job, I'll get complaints," he said. I cursed my brother quietly under my breath. Martin laughed loudly, his voice uninhibited. "You're adorable," he said, poking my forehead with his finger. I took a step back, avoiding his touch, but he pointed to the distance and suggested, "How about this? You can make it up to me in another way." Martin handed me a sparkler and with a smile said, "Happy New Year in advance." I was confused but let out a soft laugh. He then asked, "Want to make a wish?" "Wish for what?" I asked. It wasn't even New Year's yet. Martin lit the sparkler in my hand with a lighter, then twirled it in the air, shouting, "Sarah, be happy under the starry sky." My heart skipped a beat. That night, Martin managed to help me forget about Brandon, even if it was just for a little while. It was different from the time when Brandon had once taken me to set off fireworks. This happiness didn't last. Martin dropped me off at home, and just as I stepped out of the car, a familiar voice caught my attention. I froze, my hand still on the car door, and turned around to see Brandon standing a short distance away, watching me. He walked over and reached out, as if to pat my head, and in his familiar tone asked, "Why are you out so late? It's not safe for a girl to be out at night." I slapped his hand away, my face cold. "What are you doing here? You've been silent for so long. Why are you here now?" I asked. "I was worried," he said cautiously. "Are you still mad at me?" Mad? Did he think this was just about me cooling off? I rolled my eyes in irritation and turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "Let's talk," he insisted. Before I could respond, Martin interrupted. His voice was firm and cutting. He slammed the car door shut and walked over, pulling Brandon's hand off me and shielding me behind him. Brandon scowled. "Get lost! Stay out of this!" Ignoring Martin, he turned back to me and yelled, "Sarah, I know I was wrong. Can you say we broke up amicably? That photo you posted is really affecting me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming you. I just want us to part on good terms." Good terms? I thought. I wasn't someone who swore often, but at that moment, countless curse words filled my mind. Before I could say anything, Martin spoke again, his tone icy, and the air around him seemed to chill. Brandon shoved Martin. "What's this got to do with you? Get lost. I won't say it again." I couldn't help but find his audacity laughable. I grabbed Martin's hand and held it in front of Brandon. "The one who should leave is you." Brandon's eyes narrowed, and his confident expression began to crumble. "Sarah, are you really ruining yourself just to spite me?" "Ruin myself?" Was Brandon blind? "He's taller than you, better looking, and in better shape. How exactly is this ruining myself?" Brandon's lips tightened, his face darkening with anger. I couldn't understand. Why was he even here in the middle of the night? Didn't Naomi stop him? Unable to resist, I asked, "Does Naomi know you're here looking for me?" Just then, Brandon's phone rang and the name Naomi appeared on the screen. Noticing my gaze, he declined the call, but a few seconds later it rang again. Reluctantly, he answered it. "I've already told you I'll be back later. Go to sleep. Stop crying. Cry, cry, cry. That's all you ever do." While Brandon was occupied with Naomi's call, I turned and walked into the apartment complex. Martin followed closely behind. At the entrance of the building, he cleared his throat and asked, "Is it inappropriate for me to go up with you at this hour?" It was only then I realized I was still holding his hand. "Sorry," I quickly let go, feeling my hand burn with the warmth of my flushed face. "Happy to help," he replied with a warm smile that made him look especially attractive. "You're really nice. Which club do you work at? I could refer you to some clients." I asked sincerely, not joking. Our family had many wealthy middle-aged women clients who would probably appreciate someone like him. Martin pressed his lips together and laughed, his chest shaking with amusement. "You don't seriously think I'm in that line of work, do you?" he asked. Still a bit tipsy, I blinked at him. "Wait, you're not?" Martin laughed for a while before replying, "No, but wanting to pursue you, that's real." Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and asked Sophia blankly, "Is he crazy? He wants to pursue me right after we met?" Sophia's voice was groggy, still half asleep. "What's so weird about that? You're not exactly lacking in qualities." She paused, then added, "But I've been up all night because of you. I'm exhausted. Good night." As soon as Sophia hung up, another unfamiliar number called. I answered the phone, barely getting out a hello before Naomi's voice came through, cursing. "You're disgusting. Why are you still tangled up with Brandon after breaking up?" Still caught in my conversation with Sophia, I reflexively replied, "All right, goodbye." "Goodbye?" "My ass!" Naomi snapped, pulling me back to reality. "Don't you have any shame? Even Brandon thinks it's embarrassing to be with you. Aren't you ashamed?" "What's the big deal?" Naomi replied casually. "If I don't go to him, I'll have to marry some old man who could be my father. Honestly, if it weren't for the wedding invitation, I wouldn't even have remembered Brandon existed. I had no idea he felt so strongly about me." I kept staring at the ceiling, listening, and Naomi didn't seem to realize she should be cautious. She went on about various things, rattling off her thoughts. "Could you back off for now and give us some space? I'm still checking out a few options. Once I find someone better, I'll give him back to you. Brandon's just fickle like that. Even if it's not me, there will be someone else in the future." I couldn't take it anymore and ended the call, blocking her number. I then sent the recording of our conversation to Brandon. Martin was serious when he said he wanted to pursue me. He meant it. He asked me out every day of the week, all 7 days. I felt guilty for wasting his time, knowing I wasn't truly over the pain from my previous relationship. I turned him down each time with various excuses. However, I had forgotten that having an overly persistent brother at home was a problem. He coaxed me into going out with him, promising that it would be a casual gathering with familiar faces and no awkwardness. When I pushed the door open, sure enough, everyone there was familiar, including Martin, who I'd only met once. My scalp tingled immediately, and all I wanted was to run away, but Sophia held me back, winking as if to reassure me. I forced myself to sit down, trying to look calm. Martin continued smiling at me, saying, "We're just chatting and playing games, nothing serious." Would I lie to my own sister? My brother thumped his chest. Reality soon proved otherwise. Staring at the drink placed in front of me, I looked at my family and best friend, thinking blankly that if I ever believed another word they said, I was a fool. My brother argued, "Hey, it's not my fault you have bad luck. And what's the point of truth or dare if we don't ask the juicy questions? If you don't want to hold hands with Martin, you'll have to drink. There's no family favoritism at this game table." After 2 drinks, my head was already spinning. Reaching unsteadily for the next glass, I barely touched it before Martin snatched it away. "All right, enough messing with her. I'll drink for her," he said. That night, I lost count of how many drinks Martin had on my behalf, but I distinctly remember my parents scolding my brother the next day, not once, but 3 times. After that, my brother was much more restrained, and Martin finally got the chance to see me one-on-one. Unfortunately, Brandon didn't get along with Martin. On the day I went outside to wait for Martin after a phone call, Brandon unexpectedly showed up again. It had been a month since I last saw him. He looked worn out, dark circles under his eyes. He walked over to me with a somber expression. "I've made things clear with Naomi. She won't be interfering with us anymore." I sidestepped, looking down the street for Martin's car, determined to ignore Brandon. He followed me, blocking my view. "Are you still mad at me? I even shared that recording with others. Naomi's reputation is ruined. She won't bother you again. You can relax now." The her he was referring to was obviously Naomi, but I didn't care. Shoving him aside, I said, "You're the one bothering me now. Let me go. Stop coming around. Even sparing you a glance makes me afraid of the gossip from others." "If you're worried about that, we don't have to go public," he said earnestly, as if he wasn't joking. "People say you truly see a person's nature after a breakup, but I stared at Brandon for a long time and still couldn't see him clearly. "Do you think you're clever with such a disgusting idea? Get out of my way!" I snapped and turned to head back inside, planning to wait for Martin before coming out again. "Sarah, I admit I was wrong. What more do you want? Do you want me to kneel before you for forgiveness?" Brandon grabbed me tightly, refusing to let go. Unable to break free, I slapped him hard across the face. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he tried to drag me toward his car. Behind us, the screeching of tires echoed, followed by frantic footsteps and the whoosh of a swinging fist. By the time I snapped out of it, Martin and Brandon were already fighting, both unwilling to back down. Martin got beaten up badly, though he wouldn't admit it. "You've got it wrong. That guy got it worse. I've been trained, you know," he said, grinning. I glanced at the bandages on his hands, bitterness welling up inside me. "I'm sorry for getting you hurt," I said, more than willing to at least earn some sympathy points. Martin teased, his tone light-hearted. "To say I wasn't touched at all would be a lie." But then his smile slowly faded. "Maybe we shouldn't see each other anymore." His words made my heart ache. "You still don't like me," he said quietly, his eyes dimming with self-mockery. It wasn't true that I didn't like him. Martin was fun to be around, and I enjoyed spending time with him. But the timing was wrong. Brandon had exhausted me, and I didn't want to drag someone else into this mess. I wasn't ready to start a new relationship. I explained my reasoning honestly, but it seemed Martin only heard the first part of my explanation. His eyes reddened, tears brimming but not falling. "How can you decide I'm unrelated? Do you know how happy I was when you called off the wedding? You don't know. You have no idea how much I like you. Then again, why would you? You've only ever had eyes for him. You probably don't even remember who I am." Martin's unshed tears hovered at the edge of his lashes, refusing to fall. I felt my heart submerged in them, suffocating. "I don't understand what you're saying," I muttered. Martin leaned against the wall, covering his eyes with his arm. His voice was faint. "Crying in front of someone you like is too humiliating." My mind was spinning with confusion. Finally, I turned around and walked away, leaving him where he stood. As I reached the stairwell, I called my brother and finally got the full story about Martin. "Remember that one time during New Year's when I brought a classmate back home? He only stayed one night, and you even set off fireworks with him." I searched my memory and vaguely recalled a figure. It was the year I had just met Brandon. Did I set off fireworks with him? I thought. But my brother had just left, and that lone figure sitting in the yard looked so isolated and desolate. I had handed him a few sparklers I had snatched from some kids as I walked by. Martin hadn't seemed interested. He had held the sparklers, muttered a thank you, and left them at his feet. At the time, I didn't know what had gotten into me. I turned back, took the lit sparkler in my hand, and shoved it at him. "Happy New Year. Be happy," I had said. After that, I didn't remember anything else. My brother, however, seemed annoyed as he continued. When Brandon called, you dropped everything and left him. Because of that, he's been thinking about you for 5 years. I couldn't believe it and rushed back to ask Martin. Is it really just because I set off some fireworks with you and said Happy New Year? I asked. Martin sat there, his reddened eyes filled with unwillingness. I asked that not enough? He softly asked. Sarah, it had been so long since anyone wished me a Happy New Year or told me to be happy. I remembered then what my brother had mentioned before. Martin's family had money, but nothing else. What if I disappoint you? I asked, lowering my head. But Martin smiled. That night, you talked on the phone for so long, and I just watched you. You never turned around, but today you turned around. That's a good start. From his words, I heard a mixture of hope and determination. I should have felt troubled by it, but surprisingly, I didn't. I even began thinking about how to cut ties with Brandon for good. I didn't have to think for long. Someone else gave him the punishment he deserved. Naomi was the one who told me about it. She called, her tone sharp and aggressive. Are you satisfied now with how things turned out? Hearing her familiar voice, I instinctively wanted to hang up. Why did you force me to harm someone, to do something I didn't want to do? I froze, a bad feeling creeping over me. What did you do? The recording. Naomi replied calmly. I genuinely wanted to return Brandon to you when I said those things to you, but why did you have to record it and give him the chance to ruin my plans? You don't understand what I've lost. Her tone was eerily calm, so calm that I couldn't help but ask, Are you okay? I got married yesterday, she replied, completely ignoring my question, to an old man with some disgusting fetish. I didn't know whether to congratulate her or apologize, so I changed the subject. If you're upset about the recording, blame yourself and that clingy Brandon. You both kept bothering me. Naomi hummed in agreement. Brandon does deserve it, so I gave him a little punishment. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. Nothing much, she said lightly, chuckling, her calmness tinged with madness. I stabbed him a few times. You should be happy I did you a huge favor. My heart pounded wildly, leaving me speechless. But don't celebrate too soon, she continued. I'm on my way to see him. I froze. Why? I asked. But Naomi didn't answer. Instead, I heard the sound of a violent collision, followed by silence. The call disconnected. As soon as the call ended, I reported it to the police. They acted quickly, and by the afternoon, they had an update for me. Surveillance showed Naomi was on the highway during the call. Her phone disconnected because she had crashed into another car after failing to brake in time. She was taken to the hospital. However, my brother later found out through his connections that she didn't survive the accident. The investigation revealed multiple wounds on her body that weren't caused by the crash. And Brandon? He had indeed been stabbed multiple times. Every wound was critical. He was still in the ICU, and according to the doctors, even if he survived, his life would never be the same. Hearing this, I finally felt a weight lift off my chest, complete freedom. Martin, however, wasn't as reassured. He started visiting me more frequently, constantly staying by my side under the pretense of preventing me from developing anxiety or depression. I stared at him confused, but said nothing. A few months later, my life slowly returned to peace. After those chaotic days, I decided to give myself some time to rediscover my balance. Each morning, I went for a run in the park, read a few pages of my favorite books in the evening, and occasionally watched a movie by myself. Slowly, I realized that life could be fulfilling, even alone. Martin hadn't given up. He stopped mentioning anything about pursuing me and instead stayed by my side like a friend. He took me to eat street food, sent me funny videos, and even helped me with work problems from time to time. His smile was always light and carefree, like a ray of sunshine breaking through the shadows in my world. One day during my morning run, I saw a fireworks display in the park. The fireworks bloomed against the misty morning air, strangely beautiful and captivating. I stopped in my tracks and suddenly thought of that night when Martin held a sparkler shouting, "Sarah, be happy!" A wave of warmth rose in my chest as I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. "Martin, do you remember the fireworks?" I asked. There was a brief pause before his smiling voice came through. "Of course I remember." "Why?" Do you want to set them off again? Yes, I replied, my tone lighter than I expected. This time, will you join me? That night, when the fireworks faded, life began to shine again.